What if everything you thought was real turned out to be a lie? Maya thought she was leaving her past behind, but the world she escaped from had other plans. With danger closing in and betrayal around every corner, will she find redemption, or will revenge consume her? Watch her fight for freedom as a dangerous game forces her to choose between love and survival. Where will she go when there's no way out? Tune in and discover what happens next. Maya Duarte walked down the street, her feet tapping rhythmically on the cracked pavement. The weight of the day's work was on her shoulders, her mind preoccupied with the unrelenting thoughts of her future. She had just finished her shift at the boutique, a place where dreams of a fashion career seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. The neon lights of the city blinked in the distance, offering little comfort. Another long day, another unremarkable night. As she crossed the intersection, the sudden screech of tires tore through the quiet evening. She barely had time to react before a sleek black car came to a halt just inches from her. Her heart raced as she took a step back, barely avoiding the vehicle. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a pair of piercing blue eyes that locked onto hers. "Are you okay?" a deep voice asked, laced with concern. Maya blinked, still recovering from the shock. She nodded, unable to form a coherent response. The man behind the wheel was nothing like the type she usually encountered. He was dressed impeccably, his suit tailored to perfection, his presence commanding despite the casual air about him. There was something about him, something enigmatic and undeniable, that made her hesitate. "You're lucky," he continued, his gaze softening. "You could have been hurt." Maya forced a smile, stepping away from the car. "I'm fine, really, just a little shaken." He didn't seem convinced. The man pushed the door open and stepped out of the car, the movement deliberate, almost slow, as if he were in no rush. His height, his confidence, everything about him exuded power, but it wasn't intimidating. There was an odd gentleness in his demeanor that made Maya feel both unsettled and intrigued. He extended his hand, a slight grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Zaid Al-Fahim." She hesitated before shaking his hand. "Maya Duarte." His smile deepened. "Maya, interesting name. I don't think I've seen you around before." Maya shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not usually out here this late." "Neither am I," Zaid replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But tonight, it seems the city brought us together." Maya could feel her pulse quicken. Something about his words felt almost predestined, like a part of her was being pulled into something she couldn't understand. Her curiosity tugged at her, but she didn't want to admit it. This encounter was too bizarre to make sense of. Zaid stepped back, his gaze sweeping over her for a brief moment, before his eyes locked with hers again. "Let me make it up to you," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with an unspoken promise. "Let me take you for coffee or dinner wherever you want, just to make sure you're okay." Maya felt a flicker of hesitation. Her instincts screamed at her to walk away, to avoid the allure of someone so out of place in her world. But her curiosity, her need to break free from the routine of her life, whispered another thought. She started, her voice trailing off. Zaid smiled as if he'd read her mind. "You don't have to decide now. Just know the offer stands." With a quick movement, he pulled out a business card and handed it to her. The sleek black card shimmered under the streetlights, and Maya couldn't help but notice the intricate design on the front, a mark she didn't recognize. Zaid's eyes met hers one last time, something unreadable in their depths. "Call me," he said, his tone low and steady, "if you want to know more." Maya took the card, her fingers brushing against his for a fleeting second. It felt almost too intimate, and she quickly withdrew her hand, looking down at the card in her palm. "I'll think about it," she murmured, before turning and walking away, the sound of her footsteps lost in the hum of the city. But as she disappeared into the night, the strange feeling that she had just encountered someone who could change her life forever lingered in her chest. The card, heavy in her pocket, felt like a tether to a world she wasn't sure she was ready for. She didn't know why, but she felt an undeniable pull to call him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fate. Whatever it was, She knew her life had just shifted, but whether that shift would lead to something beautiful or terrifying, she couldn't yet tell. The next day, Maya sat in the cramped apartment she had called home for the past 2 years, sipping on the last of her cold coffee. The city outside felt far removed from her life. Another day to trudge through, another day of making ends meet. Her dreams of becoming a renowned fashion designer seemed as distant as ever. The ringing of her phone broke her reverie. She glanced down at the screen, not expecting anything interesting. But the name on the display caught her off guard. Zaid Al-Fahim. Her pulse quickened. She almost didn't answer, then paused. She didn't know why, but she had to. Hello? Good afternoon, Maya. Zaid's voice was smooth and familiar, just like the night they met. It's Zaid. She could hear the faint hum of his office in the background, the sound of power, wealth, and importance filling the silence between them. Hi, she replied, trying to sound casual, though her heartbeat was racing. How's everything? Everything's perfect now that I'm speaking with you. His voice carried a light flirtation that made her pause. Maya swallowed hard, feeling a heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or just the way he spoke, but it had an effect. I wanted to ask, he continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. I've been thinking about our last meeting. You looked like you could use a break from everything. I'm hosting a private event tonight, and I'd like you to join me. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had expected him to ask for dinner or coffee, but a private event? This was different. This was a world she barely understood, let alone felt comfortable in. She hesitated, glancing at her worn-out clothes and the cluttered apartment around her. I don't know, Zaid, I'm not really… Come on, Maya. His voice softened, coaxing. It's just for an evening, no expectations. I promise it will be enlightening. You could use a change of scenery. Her mind raced. A change of scenery. She needed it. The monotony of her life had begun to suffocate her, and Zaid's words were an irresistible temptation. But was she ready for a world so far removed from hers? Was she ready for the unknown? I'll think about it, she said, her voice wavering slightly. It felt like she was standing on the edge of something, and the only way forward was to take a leap. Don't think too long, he said, his voice holding a playful edge now. I'll be expecting you. I'll send a car for you at 8. There was a finality in his words, a command wrapped in kindness. Maya exhaled slowly, staring at the phone in her hand. There was something magnetic about him, something she couldn't quite explain. She could feel her pulse beating faster just from hearing his voice, knowing she was about to step into a world she didn't know. The phone call ended, and the apartment felt quieter somehow. She sat back against the couch, unsure of what to do next. Her instincts screamed at her to decline, to stay safe, to stay in her own world. But a part of her, the part she didn't like to admit, was eager to see what Zaid's world had to offer. The clock ticked slowly as she weighed her options. But the idea of staying trapped in her routine, of letting life slip by without taking a risk, felt worse than the unknown. She had to go. She stood up and walked over to her closet, pulling out the only dress she had that wasn't stained or too worn. It was simple, but it would do. For a moment she wondered why she was even questioning it. Zaid had given her an offer she couldn't refuse, the chance to step outside her life, even for just one night. It wasn't about him, not really, it was about her. She was tired of being the one who held herself back. Tonight, she would let go. At 8 o'clock sharp, she stood outside her building, her heart pounding in her chest. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, the kind of car she'd only seen in movies. The driver opened the door, and there, standing in the doorway, was Zaid. His eyes locked onto hers with that familiar, unreadable intensity. Ready? He asked, his voice smooth like a promise. Maya nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness swirl within her. She stepped into the car, feeling the tension in the air rise with each second that passed. As they drove away from her small apartment, the city skyline in the distance seemed to blur. This was the beginning of something. But what? She wasn't sure. But tonight it didn't matter. The car pulled up to a towering building in the heart of Beverly Hills. Maya's heart beat a little faster as she stepped out onto the sleek marble steps. Zaid was already standing at the entrance waiting for her, his figure cast in the golden glow of the setting sun. The moment their eyes met, she felt a familiar pull, but now there was something different, something more serious in his gaze. "Glad you could make it," he said, his voice smooth as ever, though there was an edge to it tonight. He extended his arm and she hesitated just a moment before accepting, allowing herself to be led into the building. The interior was far more luxurious than any place she had ever been, even in her wildest dreams. The walls were lined with art, the chandeliers sparkling like stars, but it wasn't the opulence that caught her attention. It was the sense of danger lurking in the air, a heaviness that didn't belong in a room so grand. Zaid guided her through a large set of double doors into a private space. Several people were already gathered, their conversations stopping momentarily as Zaid entered with Maya at his side. She felt every pair of eyes on her, and though she tried to hold her composure, she could sense the judgment, perhaps because she wasn't part of their world. "You look stunning, Maya," Zaid said quietly, pulling her back to him with a touch on her elbow. His compliment should have made her feel good, but tonight it only seemed to underscore how out of place she felt. "Thanks," she replied, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. She couldn't stop herself from glancing at the group around her. Most of them were wearing expensive suits or gowns, their conversations dripping with business talk and power moves. And there, standing by the bar, was Rami, Zaid's brother. His cold stare met hers from across the room, and Maya quickly looked away, her stomach tightening. "You're very quiet tonight," Zaid observed, his tone not accusatory but full of curiosity. He was watching her closely, his dark eyes studying her every move. "Is everything all right?" Maya hesitated. She didn't want to admit that she felt like an outsider. "Just a lot to take in," she said, forcing a smile. Zaid smiled back but didn't press further. Instead, he led her to a private table near the back of the room. As they sat, the quiet hum of conversation continued around them, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Zaid's calm demeanor seemed to mask something deeper, a hidden agenda perhaps. She just couldn't put her finger on it. "You know, I didn't bring you here just to show you the world," Zaid said after a moment, his voice turning serious. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "There's something you need to know." Maya's curiosity piqued, but she remained silent, letting him continue. The way he spoke now, intense with purpose, was different from before. "There are deals being made tonight," Zaid began, his eyes flicking around the room to ensure they weren't overheard. "Deals that could change everything for my family. Deals that could change everything for you too." Maya's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Zaid paused for a moment, his fingers tapping the table lightly. "I'm offering you a chance, Maya, to be part of something much bigger than yourself. You see, my family—" He stopped, almost as though he was weighing his words carefully. "They need someone to represent their interests, someone who can connect with the right people, someone who understands the value of power, not just in business, but in life." Maya leaned back slightly, trying to process what he was saying. "And you think I'm that person?" Zaid smiled, but there was an intensity to his gaze that left her feeling uncertain. "I know you're more capable than you let on. I've watched you, Maya. You're driven. You have the potential to be more than just a designer in a boutique. You could be part of something much bigger, something that would give you everything you've ever wanted." Her chest tightened at his words. Was he offering her a chance to escape her current life? To leave behind the daily grind, the struggles? The temptation was there, undeniable, but something else gnawed at her, something she couldn't shake. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zaid's smile faded, and he leaned in closer, his voice lower now, full of gravity. "The catch, Maya, is that my family doesn't like outsiders. They've worked hard to build their empire, and they don't trust anyone who hasn't paid their dues. But I believe you can be the one to bridge that gap. You just have to be willing to make the right choices." Maya's head spun as his words hit her with a force she hadn't expected. She had always dreamed of being more than what she was, of escaping her current reality, but she never imagined it would come at such a cost. Zaid's offer wasn't just an opportunity, it was a commitment, one that would tie her to a world that she had no experience with, a world of power, manipulation, and danger. "And if I don't want to be a part of that?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Zaid's expression softened, though there was an edge to his gaze. "Then you walk away. But understand this. Once you know what I'm offering, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. You'll always know what could have been." The weight of his words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Maya wasn't sure what to say next, her thoughts racing. She had come here to see what Zaid's world had to offer, but now she realized that this wasn't just about curiosity. It was about a choice that could change everything. Zaid stood, and with one last look, he extended his hand. "Think about it, Maya. I'll be here when you're ready." Maya watched him walk away, his figure lost in the crowd. Her heart was pounding. What had she just agreed to? Her gaze shifted to the card in her pocket, the same card that had started this all. She had thought it was just a casual invitation, but now she wasn't so sure. The decision was hers, and whatever she chose, there was no turning back. Maya sat in the back of the car, her fingers gripping the edge of the seat as the city passed by in a blur of lights. The night had taken a turn she wasn't ready for. Zaid's words, his promises, lingered in the air between them. She had come to see the man behind the enigmatic charm, to understand the pull he had over her. And yet, with every passing moment, she felt a growing sense of unease. The car finally stopped in front of a sleek modern building. Maya's breath caught in her chest as she stepped out into the cold night air. Something was off. Zaid had insisted she come to this exclusive gathering. His words had been filled with excitement, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being led into something much darker. She was ushered inside. A small but tight group gathered around the elegant space. Zaid was nowhere to be found. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the room, looking for any familiar face. But it wasn't the people that caught her attention. It was the atmosphere, thick with tension, as though everyone was waiting for something. And then she saw him. Rami, Zaid's brother, leaning against a marble pillar, his eyes already fixed on her. The coldness in his gaze sent a chill down her spine. She had avoided him at the gala earlier that night, but now there was no escape. As she made her way toward him, a familiar sense of discomfort filled her chest. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Maya," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that made her pause. "I think we need to talk." She froze, unsure of what to say. Something in his tone made her want to turn around and walk out, but her feet wouldn't move. The pull of the night, of everything she had been trying to understand, kept her rooted to the spot. "What do you want to talk about?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Rami studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a secluded corner of the room, gesturing for her to follow. Maya hesitated, but something told her she had no choice. She had to know what was going on. As they stepped out of the main crowd, away from prying eyes, Rami spoke again. "I know what you're doing," he said, his voice colder now. "I know why you're here." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" He smirked, the bitterness in his expression now unmistakable. "You think Zaid is just some charming billionaire, right? That he's going to take you away from all this?" He motioned vaguely toward the room around them, his eyes hardening. "You're just a pawn in his game, Maya." Her stomach lurched at the words, but she stood her ground. "I'm not a pawn," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I came here to understand Zaid, not be part of whatever this is." Rami's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You still don't get it, do you?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Zaid's family doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about you." His gaze flicked to the far corner of the room where the shadows seemed to loom larger than life. "They never have." Maya felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. She could feel it now, the weight of his words, the truth in them. Every moment spent in Zaid's world had seemed too easy, too smooth. But now, standing in front of Rami, the cracks in the facade began to show. "You're lying," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Zaid wouldn't." "Oh, he would," Rami cut her off. "And he will. You think you can walk away from this? That you can have some happy ending with him? He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. You're already in too deep, Maya, and he's already made his decision. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Maya turned quickly, her heart pounding as she saw Zaid emerge from the shadows. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, Maya thought she saw something familiar in his gaze. Something that made her feel less like an outsider and more like someone he cared about. But then he looked at Rami, and the coldness returned. Is everything okay? Zaid's voice was calm, but there was a tension in his posture that Maya hadn't seen before. Rami shot her one last look, a look that made her stomach twist, and then turned to Zaid. It's fine, he said, his voice still carrying an edge. Just making sure she understands where she stands. Zaid's gaze flickered back to Maya, a brief flash of something that looked like regret in his eyes. It was gone too quickly for her to grasp, but it was enough to leave her unsettled. Come on, Zaid said, his tone now softer as if trying to draw her back into his world. Let's get you a drink. But Maya couldn't move. The words Rami had said echoed in her mind, drowning out everything else. You're just a pawn. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she turned away from Zaid and Rami, her feet carrying her toward the exit before she had time to think. A moment of betrayal had shaken her, and though she wasn't sure whether the betrayal had come from Zaid or his brother, she knew one thing for certain. Her world had just been turned upside down, and she wasn't sure she could trust anyone anymore. Maya's hands trembled as she fumbled with her purse, sitting in the back of the car on the way to Zaid's estate. The weight of the night's events, Rami's words, the lingering sense of betrayal clung to her like a shadow. She could still feel the coldness in his gaze, the threat veiled behind his every word. Zaid had not followed her out of the room, but his message was clear. He had stayed behind with his brother, leaving Maya to grapple with the truth she was still unwilling to accept. She couldn't even bring herself to think about what had transpired between them. She had been foolish to think she was safe in Zaid's world, but as the car sped through the city, the reality settled deep in her gut. What was Zaid hiding? She had thought he was different, thought there was a genuine connection between them. But Rami's words had shattered that illusion. The question she'd been avoiding for days now burned in her mind. Could she trust Zaid? Could she trust anyone in this world? The car slowed to a stop, pulling up to the grand entrance of Zaid's mansion. The house loomed ahead, as if waiting for her to enter, to make the next decision. She could almost feel the tension in the air, the decision pressing down on her chest like a weight. She stepped out of the car, her mind whirling. She hadn't called Zaid, hadn't heard from him since she left the gathering, and yet here she was. The door to the mansion opened just as she approached. Zaid stood there, his expression unreadable but still somehow inviting, as if nothing had happened. Maya, he said, his voice low and smooth. I'm glad you came. She nodded stiffly, taking a deep breath as she walked past him. The space inside the mansion was grand, elegant, and empty, yet it felt suffocating. Her every step seemed to echo, marking the distance between her and the life she thought she knew. Can we talk? Zaid's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to face him, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. What do you want from me, Zaid? He paused for a moment, as if considering how to answer her question. His eyes were searching hers, as if trying to find a way to make her understand. I want you to trust me, he said softly, but the words didn't reach her. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Trust you? She repeated, disbelief rising in her chest. After everything that happened tonight? After what your brother said? Her voice was steady but edged with a mixture of confusion and anger. You think I'm just going to forget that? Zaid's eyes darkened for a moment, the quiet resolve in his expression shifting to something more intense. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You're not just anyone, Maya. You're the one who has the power to change everything. The words hit her like a blow. She recoiled, instinctively taking a step back. I don't know what you're talking about. Zaid reached out, his hand catching hers before she could retreat any further. His grip was firm, though gentle, his touch sending a jolt through her. You're in this deeper than you realize. I'm offering you a way out, but only if you're willing to make the choice. What choice? Maya's breath hitched. She wanted to pull away, but his grip held her in place. Zaid's voice dropped, the quiet urgency in it making her heart race. I'm asking you to trust me enough to take a step into a world that will change everything for you. For both of us. His gaze was steady, unwavering. You have the opportunity to join me, to leave everything behind and be part of something greater. But you need to decide if you're willing to risk it all. Her mind reeled. The offer sounded absurd, too good to be true. She could feel the weight of it, of the danger that lingered beneath the surface of his words. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about power, about stepping into a world where everything would be different. And it terrified her. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling as she finally pulled her hand free. What are you asking me to do, Zaid? He stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm offering you control, Maya. Control over your future, over your life. A chance to break free from everything that holds you back. My family, they can give you everything you've ever wanted. All you have to do is be part of the plan. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The proposition he was making wasn't just about joining forces with him. It was about becoming part of a world where loyalties were tested, where betrayal was expected. Maya felt a chill creep up her spine as she took a step away from him, trying to process the full weight of his words. You don't have to decide right now, Zaid continued, his tone softer, almost pleading. But I want you to understand what this means. You're not just a designer, Maya. You can be someone who controls the world around her, if you're willing to take the risk. She swallowed hard, her thoughts spinning. She had never imagined that the world she was being drawn into could come with such a price. But Zaid wasn't just offering her a chance to escape her struggles. He was offering her a way into a future she didn't know if she was ready for. But how could she walk away from a chance like this? Why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Though the question had been on her mind the whole time. Why are you offering me this? Zaid's expression softened, and for a moment she saw a flicker of something. Vulnerability, maybe. Because I believe you're capable of more than you think. Because I trust you, Maya. It was the first time he had spoken those words, and they left her stunned. The trust she had been searching for, the one thing she had never found in her life, was now offered to her by a man whose life was built on lies and power. But did she trust him? She couldn't answer that question. Not yet. But as the weight of his words settled in, she realized that the choice he was asking her to make wasn't just about Zaid anymore. It was about who she wanted to be. And as she stood there, looking into his eyes, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was never going to be the same again. Maya's heart was still racing from the conversation she had with Zaid. His words lingered in her mind like an echo, vibrating through her chest with the intensity of everything he'd said. She had tried to shake off the nagging doubt that gnawed at her, but it wasn't easy. What was she really getting herself into? She stepped out of the car, her breath catching in her throat as she looked up at the grand estate. The night had grown quiet, the chill in the air suddenly too much to ignore. The mansion loomed over her like a silent sentinel, its windows reflecting a city that seemed both distant and close. The invitation had come again, the promise of a new life. As she walked towards the front door, she could feel the weight of the decision she was about to make pressing against her chest. Zaid had offered her everything, but she still didn't know if she could trust him. Not fully. The door opened before she could reach it. Zaid stood there, a smile on his face that felt more forced than welcoming. I thought I'd lost you for a second, he said, stepping aside to let her in. Maya didn't respond. Her mind was still racing. She could feel her heart thumping against her ribs. Her eyes scanned the hallway, expecting something familiar, something that would ease the growing tension inside her. But the mansion felt like a maze, full of shadows and secrets. Zaid didn't give her much time to think. Come, let's talk. She followed him into a private study, the door closing quietly behind her. The room was dimly lit, bookshelves lining the walls. A fire crackled in the hearth, but the warmth it provided didn't reach her. Zaid motioned to a chair, but she didn't sit. She stood by the window, her gaze drifting over the city below. You seem troubled, Zaid said, his voice carrying a softness she hadn't heard before. I know this is all a lot to take in, but you have to trust me. Maya turned to face him. I want to, Zaid, but something doesn't feel right. You're asking me to step into a world I don't understand. I don't even know if I can trust you, let alone your family. Zaid stepped closer, his eyes intent on her. You're already in it, Maya. This world isn't just a choice. It's a reality. You either accept it or you leave it. But once you know what I can offer, there's no going back. Her heart raced at the thought. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the idea of being tied to Zaid's world, or the possibility of walking away from it and never knowing what could have been. Suddenly, the tension in the room was broken by the sound of the door crashing open. Maya spun around, her pulse spiking as two men stormed into the room, grabbing her before she could react. Get off me, she screamed, struggling against their grip. Zaid's voice cut through the chaos. Let her go. But the men didn't listen. One of them shoved Maya hard into the wall, knocking the wind out of her. Panic surged in her chest as she tried to break free, but the men's grip was unyielding. What the hell is going on? She gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Zaid stood there, his expression a mix of regret and resolve. I didn't want this to happen, but it's too late now. Maya's eyes widened in shock as she realized what was happening. Zaid, what are you doing? He didn't answer her. Instead, he nodded toward the two men who began dragging her toward the door. She struggled, fighting to escape their hold, but they were too strong. Stop! Let me go! She screamed, her voice a frantic plea. Don't make this harder than it has to be, one of the men growled as they shoved her into the hallway. Her mind was spinning. Why was this happening? Why had Zaid let this happen? Her thoughts were interrupted as they pushed her into a dark, windowless room. The door slammed shut behind her, locking her in. The air was thick with tension, the only sound her own ragged breathing. She tried to gather her bearings, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the cold stone walls. The reality of the situation was slowly sinking in. Zaid had promised her safety, yet here she was, trapped, uncertain of what was happening. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Maya sank to her knees, her head spinning. The truth hit her hard. She had been played. This wasn't a partnership. This wasn't the opportunity for a new life. This was something far darker, something she wasn't prepared for. Her mind raced. What did Zaid want from her? Why had he led her here only to have her taken by force? Was everything he had told her just a lie? Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Zaid. He stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I never wanted it to go like this. Maya looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal. What is this? What are you doing? Zaid hesitated for a moment before speaking. You didn't understand the danger. You're not just part of my world, Maya. You're part of something much bigger. A deal that's been in the works long before you ever came into my life. Maya's heart skipped a beat. What deal? What are you talking about? Zaid stepped closer, his voice low. It was never about us, Maya. It was always about power, about control, and you. You were the key. Her chest tightened as his words sank in. She wasn't a partner. She was a pawn in a game she didn't even know she had been playing. Why? She whispered, her voice breaking. Why did you make me believe all of this? Zaid didn't respond. Instead, he reached out to touch her cheek, but Maya recoiled. You should have never trusted me, he murmured, before turning and leaving her alone in the dark. The door slammed shut behind him and the darkness swallowed her whole. Maya sat in the cold, dark room, her legs drawn up to her chest. The silence was oppressive, heavy, and suffocating. She had tried to process everything, but the fear, the shock, it was too much to handle. Zaid's words echoed in her mind, each one more chilling than the last. You were the key. Her mind kept replaying the moment when he had walked away, leaving her alone in the darkness. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. She had trusted him, trusted that there was something real between them. But now, as the truth began to settle in, she realized how wrong she had been. The door creaked open, the hinges groaning in the stillness. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to face him again. She wasn't sure she could. Zaid stepped into the room, his presence undeniable. His eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, she thought she saw something softer in his gaze. Regret, maybe? but it was gone in an instant. His face was unreadable. "Why did you do this?" Maya's voice was hoarse, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "What did you want from me?" Zaid stood in front of her, his posture stiff, his eyes distant. "I never wanted it to be like this, Maya. But you need to understand what's really going on." She looked up at him, her eyes wild with disbelief. "You've been using me the whole time. For what? What's the real reason you brought me into this world?" Zaid didn't answer immediately. He looked away, his jaw clenched tightly. "You don't know everything," he said quietly. "You think I've been playing you, but the truth is this was never just about you and me." Maya's pulse quickened, a wave of dread washing over her. "Then what? What is this about?" He finally met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something almost like fear in his eyes. "It's bigger than both of us, Maya. You're part of something much more dangerous than you think. You don't even realize the role you're playing in all of this." She shook her head in confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. Zaid let out a long, ragged sigh. "My family. They're involved in things you can't even begin to imagine. Power, money, control, everything. But it's not just about that anymore. It's about who holds the key to it all. And that key, Maya, is you." Her heart stopped. She couldn't breathe. "What do you mean? What do you want me to do with all of this?" Zaid stepped closer to her, his expression darkening. "You were brought here because my family needed someone to take my place, someone who could lead them, someone who could control everything. But you—" He paused, his voice thick with something unspoken. "You were never supposed to know." Maya's mind spun. "So this was all a lie?" Her voice cracked as she stood up, her legs shaking beneath her. "You used me to get closer to your family, to take control of everything, and you never even—" "Never what?" Zaid's voice interrupted her, low and deadly calm. "Never cared about you?" He stepped even closer, until they were face to face. His breath was steady, but his eyes were burning with something she couldn't quite name. "I do care, Maya, more than you think. But this world, it doesn't leave room for feelings. It doesn't leave room for love." Maya's chest tightened at his words, the realization that she had been a pawn in someone else's game crashing down on her. Her trust, her love, it had all been a facade, built on lies and manipulation. Her head spun, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, but they only made the picture clearer in a way that horrified her. "You're telling me this now?" she whispered. "After everything? After you made me believe there was something real between us?" Zaid's face softened for a split second, as though he were going to apologize, but it passed quickly. "You were always meant to be part of something bigger, Maya. It wasn't just about us, it was about the power I could give you, the power you could give my family." She stepped back, her mind racing. The key. The more Zaid spoke, the more her understanding of the situation darkened. She had been a pawn, just like Rami had said. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, I won't be part of this. I won't be part of your family's power game." Zaid's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice taking on a cold edge she hadn't heard before. "You're already too involved. The moment you stepped into this world, you became part of the plan. You don't get to walk away now." Maya's eyes widened in fear, but there was something else, determination, that flickered deep inside her. She might be trapped, but she wasn't going to let Zaid's world swallow her whole. She had to find a way out, even if it meant turning her back on everything she thought she knew. "I don't have to stay here," she said, her voice steady now, the anger surging through her. "I don't have to play your game." Zaid's eyes darkened as he took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You can't escape, Maya. This world doesn't let people like you go." He reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched away, her eyes flashing. "No more lies, Zaid," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "I've had enough." For a long moment there was silence. Zaid seemed to be measuring her, as if weighing whether to continue the game he had set in motion or to back down. But in his eyes, Maya saw the truth. There was no escaping this world. It was too late. "Then it's time you learned what that truth really means," he said, his voice now hard and final. She looked at him one last time, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had just learned. The room, The silence, it all felt suffocating, as if she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Maya didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Maya's breath was shaky as she leaned against the cold stone wall of the small, dimly lit room. She had barely slept, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and anger. Everything had become so tangled. Zaid's words, his promises, the dark secrets that were now spilling into her life like a flood. The realization hit her again like a crushing weight. She was in deeper than she had ever imagined. She had tried to leave, to walk away, but the gravity of the situation held her down. She could feel it, the invisible thread that bound her to Zaid's world, to his family's dangerous empire. There was no turning back, no clean exit, but the truth had changed everything. When Zaid had locked her in that room, the finality of his words echoed in her mind. "You're already in it." She couldn't escape now. She had to make a choice, fight for her freedom or accept her fate and play by their rules. Her decision was made before she even knew it. She couldn't give in. She wouldn't. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't expect it to be Zaid, not after everything. But when the door opened, it wasn't him who stepped inside. Jake. Her pulse shot through her chest. He wasn't supposed to be here, not now, not in this place. But there he was, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. He closed the door quietly behind him and stood for a moment, watching her, before taking a step closer. "Jake!" Maya's voice was a whisper, barely audible. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the room as if checking for anyone else, then settled on her. "You shouldn't be here, Maya. This whole situation, it's way worse than you think." She stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her. "What do you mean? What's going on? Why is this happening?" Jake hesitated, then crossed the room to stand in front of her. His voice dropped, as though speaking louder would make the truth more dangerous. "I've been keeping an eye on things. I'm not just a friend, Maya. I'm connected. And you're tangled up in something much darker than you realize." Maya's stomach twisted. "Connected? You mean to Zaid? His family?" Jake's face hardened, and his eyes avoided hers for a moment. Then he met her gaze, his expression raw. "I've been working with them for a while now." Her heart dropped. "What?" The word barely left her lips, her mind struggling to process his words. "You've been working with them?" "I didn't know how deep it went," Jake said, his voice soft but urgent. "I thought I could control it, stay on the right side. But everything's shifting, Maya. You don't know what you're dealing with, and neither does Zaid." Maya felt the ground beneath her feet shifting as the weight of Jake's confession settled over her. Zaid didn't know? Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You're telling me you've been working for them this whole time, and you didn't think to warn me?" "I didn't think you'd get involved," Jake shot back, his voice raw with frustration. "When I first met you, I thought it was just business. But you're not just a bystander anymore. You've got blood on your hands now, whether you like it or not." Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't asked for any of this. She didn't want any part of it. She had come here to escape, not to be pulled into a world of corruption and lies. "I need you to listen, Maya," Jake continued, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "You need to get out, now. I've been trying to protect you from all this, but I can't keep you safe here anymore." "Protect me?" Maya repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You're the one who kept me in the dark, Jake. You let me walk into this mess, and now you expect me to trust you." "I never wanted this for you," Jake said, his tone desperate. "But it's too late now. You've crossed a line. There's no going back." Maya took a step back, her hands shaking. "What are you saying? What's happening, Jake?" "Zaid's family. Everything they've built, it's all about control, power. And they've decided they want you to be the one who takes over. They're using you, Maya, whether you like it or not. They've been grooming you for this, through Zaid, through me. You're the key to their future, their empire." She felt as though the floor had been ripped out from under her. "What do you mean? I'm not—" Her voice trailed off as the truth began to sink in. "I didn't want to tell you this," Jake said, his face tightening with regret. "But you need to understand. The moment you walked into this world, you became a target. You're not just involved in this game. You're the game." Her mind spun. "The game?" She had been a pawn all along, a pawn they were ready to sacrifice. She had been groomed, just like Zaid had said. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. "What are you asking me to do?" she whispered, barely able to speak. "I'm asking you to get out, Maya," Jake said, his voice low, filled with urgency. "Before they make their move, you can't trust Zaid. You can't trust anyone. You have to leave now." The room felt smaller, suffocating her as the walls seemed to close in. She had no choice. The decision had already been made for her. She could either stay and play their game or she could run, but running wasn't a simple option. Where could she go? Jake was right. She was too deep. Maya looked at Jake one last time, his eyes pleading with her to take action, to leave before it was too late. But in her heart, she knew there was no escaping the world she had been thrust into. "Please," Jake urged again. "It's your only chance." She nodded slowly, though her heart was heavy with the weight of the decision ahead. "I'll go," she said quietly, though the fear in her voice betrayed her calm demeanor. "I'll go, but I'm not doing it alone." And with that, the alliance had been made. Maya's fate had just been sealed. But in this dangerous world, she wasn't sure if there was any way to win. Maya stood at the edge of the terrace, her hands gripping the railing as the city stretched out before her, its lights shimmering in the distance. The cold breeze did nothing to soothe the storm raging inside her. She had taken Jake's advice. She had run, but now she was here on the verge of losing everything. Her mind was a tangle of thoughts, fear, anger, and confusion. Everything had changed. The world she had known, the fragile sense of safety she had built was no more. Now Zaid's family, Jake's betrayal, and the terrifying truth had her cornered. She had nowhere left to go. She closed her eyes, inhaling sharply, trying to steady herself. What now? A sudden sound from behind broke her thoughts. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel his presence, the weight of it settling over her like a shadow. Zaid. "Maya." His voice came softly, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. "You're still here." She didn't answer him, not at first. She just stood there, feeling the rage bubble up inside her. How could he be here? After everything? After the lies? He stepped closer, his footsteps almost silent, but she could feel him closing in. "I know you're angry. I know you're scared." He paused as though unsure of how to continue. "But you need to understand. I didn't want any of this. Not like this." She turned to face him then, her gaze fierce. "You didn't want this? Then why did you bring me into it? Why did you lie to me? Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start?" Zaid's eyes dropped, avoiding hers. He wasn't the man she had thought he was, the man who made her feel safe. Instead, he was someone lost, tangled in a web of his own making. I didn't think you'd ever get involved," Zaid said, his voice tight with guilt. "This whole thing, my family, the power games, it was never supposed to touch you. I never wanted you to be part of it." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You never wanted me to be part of it, but you used me. From the start, you told me I was special, that I was different, but I was just another pawn, just another piece in your game." Zaid's gaze hardened. "You think I wanted that? You think I wanted to hurt you? Then why didn't you stop?" Maya snapped, her chest heaving. "Why didn't you stop when you had the chance? You could have walked away, Zaid. You could have chosen something else, but you didn't. And now look where we are." She took a step back, her hands trembling. "I can't trust you anymore. I thought—" Her voice faltered, the weight of the betrayal crushing her. "I thought you cared about me." Zaid was silent for a long moment, his eyes dark with something she couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as if he had just admitted something he couldn't take back. "I do care about you, Maya," he whispered, "but not in the way you think. Not in the way you deserve." Maya recoiled at his words. She wanted to scream, to shout at him, but she couldn't. Not anymore. The truth was, it was too late. There was no turning back. She had seen the monster lurking behind his facade, and now she couldn't unsee it. She couldn't pretend anymore. "I'm done," she said, her voice cold, final. "I'm done with you, and I'm done with this world. I don't belong here." Zaid stepped forward, reaching for her, but she pulled away, her heart pounding in her chest. "Please, Maya, don't walk away," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. You don't understand. There's nothing for you out there. You're too deep in this now. You can't escape it. She shook her head, the tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. I don't care anymore. I don't care about your family, your games, your empire. She took another step back, feeling the cold air bite at her skin. I just want out. I want out of all of this. Zaid's face twisted in pain, but it was too late. The connection they once had, no matter how real it had felt, was broken. Maya, please, he said, his voice shaking now. I never meant for you to get hurt, but this is the only way. You have to understand, I'm doing this for us. For you. For us? Maya repeated, her voice full of disbelief. There is no us, Zaid. There never was. I was never part of your plan. I was never part of this world. Zaid's eyes flashed with something dark, frustration, anger, maybe even desperation. You think I wanted to drag you into this? I didn't have a choice, Maya. None of us did. This world, this life, it's all we know. And it was always going to consume you. It was always going to consume us. Maya took another step back, her mind racing, her heart breaking. She felt the pull to leave, to walk away, but the gravity of the situation kept her rooted in place. Zaid was right about one thing. There was no escaping this. She had already crossed the point of no return. I'm sorry, Zaid, she said quietly, her voice steady even though her heart felt like it was shattering. But I can't be a part of your world anymore. I can't be part of your lies. The silence between them grew heavy. Zaid's face hardened, the desperation slowly shifting into something else. He stepped away, his expression unreadable now. Maya knew what had to be done, even if it meant breaking herself in the process. She couldn't keep living in this toxic world, and she couldn't keep pretending that Zaid was the man she thought he was. Turning away, she walked toward the door, her steps slow but firm. Zaid didn't stop her. He didn't say a word as she left, but she could feel the weight of his gaze burning into her back. The breaking point had come, and she had made her choice. The room felt smaller with every step she took toward the door. Maya's heart raced in her chest as she moved with a resolve that surprised even her. Zaid had always been her weakness, but now, in the wake of everything that had happened, she was done. She had to face this, face him, one final time. She didn't know what she expected when she stepped into the grand hallway. She didn't expect the fear, the adrenaline, or the anger that surged through her when she saw him standing there. Zaid was waiting for her at the end of the hall, his back to her. He had been watching her, anticipating this moment. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable, but the way his eyes locked onto hers made her blood run cold. The distance between them felt like a chasm, but for the first time, Maya wasn't afraid. You're here. Zaid's voice was low, but it still sent a shiver down her spine. I knew you'd come back. Maya's gaze hardened. You thought I'd come back for you? Zaid took a step toward her, but she didn't move. You have no idea what's at stake here, Maya. No idea what's really going on. I know more than you think, she snapped. I know enough. His eyes narrowed, a flash of something dangerous crossing his face. You think walking away from this is going to solve anything? His voice rose now, filled with frustration and something darker. You think you're just going to leave and everything will go back to normal? Maya stood her ground, her chest rising and falling with each breath. There's nothing normal about this, Zaid. There never was. Zaid's expression flickered. He stepped closer, his tone now softer, almost pleading. I didn't want this for you. I didn't want you to be pulled into this world. But you're already in it, Maya. You can't escape it. Her throat tightened and she forced herself to speak through the lump that had formed. I'm not your pawn, Zaid. I never was. You lied to me. You used me. A silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Zaid's face was unreadable now, but she could see the pain in his eyes. He stepped closer, so close that she could feel his presence like a weight on her shoulders. I didn't want to hurt you, he whispered, but I was never in control of this. You were always meant to be part of it. From the moment we met, I knew what you would become. Maya swallowed hard, pushing back the tears that threatened to spill. So that's it? I was just a part of your plan all along. Zaid didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. She had been nothing but a means to an end. She had been a tool, a pawn in a game that she didn't even know she was playing. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as the full weight of his words sank in. "No, I won't be a part of this. Not anymore. I'm done." She turned to leave, but Zaid's voice stopped her. "You can't leave, Maya," he said, his voice tight, desperate. "You don't understand the consequences. What happens if you walk away?" She spun back around to face him. "I don't care about the consequences anymore. I don't care about any of it. I just want to leave. I want to walk away from this life, from all of it." Zaid took a step forward, his hand outstretched, but Maya backed away. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Don't ever touch me again." Zaid's eyes filled with a mixture of anger and regret. "You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to hurt you? But this world, Maya, it's not a place for people like you. You're too good for it. Too innocent." Maya laughed bitterly. "Innocent? Is that what you think? You think I'm innocent after everything I've seen, after everything I've been through? I'm not innocent, Zaid. I'm just like you, trapped." The words hit him like a physical blow. His face softened for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability passing through his eyes before he regained his composure. "You don't know what it's like," he said quietly. "You don't know what it means to be part of something like this. You think I wanted this life? I never had a choice." Maya stood tall, her heart racing. "I don't care, Zaid. You made your choices, and so have I." The silence that followed was deafening. Zaid stood motionless, the tension between them palpable. Maya could feel her heart breaking, but she knew she couldn't stay in this toxic, twisted world any longer. She couldn't let herself be pulled back into it, not even for him. She took a deep breath and turned her back on him. "Goodbye, Zaid," she whispered, her voice breaking. She didn't look back as she walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway, a shell of the man she had once thought she loved. The sound of her footsteps echoed in her ears, growing louder as she moved farther away from him. Zaid didn't call after her. He didn't stop her. But Maya knew that this moment, this decision, was the last piece of her past life that she would leave behind. She was done, and there was no going back. Maya's legs shook as she stood outside the mansion, the finality of her decision weighing on her. It was late, and the world around her seemed distant, muffled by the hum of her own racing thoughts. She had walked away from Zaid, left him behind with the bitter truth of her choice. But as she stood on the edge of that decision, a sharp pain twisted in her chest, reminding her of everything she was leaving behind. "I can't stay here." The words rang in her head like a mantra, but no matter how many times she repeated it, her heart felt heavy, torn between the part of her that wanted to run as far away from this nightmare as possible, and the part that had once believed in him, the part that loved him. She hadn't gone far when she heard it, the sound of footsteps behind her, quick, urgent. She froze. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. "Zaid." "Maya." His voice was raw, filled with something that stopped her in her tracks. The urgency in it was enough to pull her back, even if she didn't want to admit it. "Maya, please." She turned slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. Zaid stood there, only a few feet away, his expression filled with determination and something else she couldn't name. His eyes were wide, searching hers for something, an answer, a reason, anything. "Why are you following me?" Maya asked, her voice trembling, a mixture of anger and sorrow she couldn't hide. "You don't get to just show up now, after everything, after the lies." "I didn't want this to happen," Zaid said, his voice low, breaking as if the words were tearing him apart. "Maya, I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to drag you into this. I thought I could keep you safe. I thought I could protect you from all this darkness, but I couldn't." Maya stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. "You think this is about protection? About safety?" Her voice grew sharper, filled with the pain of betrayal. "This was never about protection, Zaid. This was about control, about me being a pawn in your game. You never cared about me. You never cared about us." Zaid's expression faltered, his hands trembling as he reached out to her. She flinched instinctively, stepping away from him. "Maya, please, just listen to me," he pleaded, his voice strained. "I'm asking you to understand. I'm asking you to see that He stopped, his eyes shifting as if he were battling his own emotions. I love you. I do. I didn't want any of this, but now you need to know the truth. The words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Maya felt her chest tighten, her heart skipping a beat at the sound of those words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything they had meant something, that he wasn't just another liar in a world full of lies. But her mind, her heart, couldn't let go of what she knew. No, she whispered, shaking her head again. Don't say that. Don't tell me you love me after everything that's happened. After everything you've done. Zaid's eyes were desperate now. He was losing her and he knew it. Maya, I'm begging you. I've made mistakes, horrible mistakes. But you have to understand, I was trying to protect you from all of this. I was trying to keep you safe. Maya swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she wiped away the tears that threatened to fall. I don't want to be safe in your world, Zaid. I don't want to be part of this anymore. You've taken everything from me. My trust, my hope, and now you want me to believe you? Her voice cracked as she said it, the raw pain of it cutting through her. Zaid reached out again, this time more urgently. Maya, please, don't leave me. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, but I would give anything, anything, to fix this, to make it right. I can't lose you, not like this. I can't. The words, the desperation in his voice, hit her like a physical blow. For a split second, she let her guard down, her heart aching with the possibility of redemption. She could see it, see the man beneath the surface, the man who had been trapped just like her, caught in a world that had consumed them both. But then the reality of it all slammed back into her mind. The cold truth of who Zaid really was. The man who had played her, used her. The man who had been part of the same world that had torn her apart. She pulled away from him, her voice shaking but firm. I can't, Zaid. I can't live this lie anymore. I'm not going to be a part of your world, your power games. I won't. Zaid's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening with the frustration of knowing he couldn't convince her. He knew it was too late for apologies, too late for excuses. You don't understand, Zaid said, his voice low and dangerous. You can't just walk away from this. You're already in it, Maya. It's not just about us anymore. You're part of something bigger than both of us. I don't care about any of that, Maya shouted, her voice breaking with the weight of her words. I don't care about your family, your empire, your power. I just want out. I want to be free of all this. Zaid stepped forward, his expression hardening as if he had made a decision. Then you leave, and everything you've ever known will be gone. You won't be safe. You can't just walk away from this. I'd rather take my chances, Maya replied, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. I'd rather walk away and face whatever comes next than stay here, trapped in this nightmare. Zaid's eyes flickered with something that resembled pain, genuine raw pain, but it wasn't enough. He stepped back, his face a mask of resignation. I'm sorry, Maya. I didn't want this for you, but I can't change it now. I can't save you from what's coming. Maya didn't look back as she turned and walked away. She didn't need to see him anymore. The man she had fallen for was gone. The man standing before her was just a shadow of who he once was, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Maya felt free. Maya's feet barely touched the ground as she moved swiftly through the darkened hallway, her mind racing, her heart pounding like a drumbeat in her chest. Every step felt heavier than the last. She'd been planning this moment for days, but now that it was happening, the fear of being caught was suffocating. The mansion, once a place of dreams and promises, had turned into a cage. She had no intention of staying. Not after everything Zaid had done, not after the lies and manipulation. She couldn't let herself be part of his world anymore, and she certainly couldn't trust him. Her eyes flicked to the shadows ahead, listening for footsteps. No one can stop me. Not anymore. With every corner she turned, her pulse quickened, but she kept moving, forcing herself to focus. She had no idea how much time she had before someone realized she was gone. Zaid wouldn't let her walk away easily. He would send someone after her. No, she had to get out now. She approached the door at the end of the hallway, the one leading to the garage where Jake had promised to have a car waiting for her. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob, but she forced herself to steady them. Focus. The door creaked open, and she stepped into the dimly lit space. She spotted the car immediately, parked just outside, its engine running, the driver standing by the door. "Go," she whispered to herself. "Go." She was almost there when a voice cut through the air like a blade, freezing her in place. "Maya." Her breath caught in her throat. Zaid. She didn't turn around, but she could feel him standing there, watching her. "What now?" His voice was thick with emotion. "Don't do this. Don't run away from me." Maya's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The pain, the betrayal, it had all led to this moment. This was it. She couldn't keep running, couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. It wasn't. It never would be. Not with him. She turned slowly, her heart heavy but determined. "I'm not running from you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm running from this life, from all of it." Zaid's face twisted with frustration. He took a step forward, but his movements were slower, more cautious. "You don't understand, Maya. I never meant for you to get involved in this. I never wanted you to be part of my world, but you are. You can't just walk away from it. I'm walking away from you, from your world," Maya said firmly. Her gaze didn't waver as she looked him in the eye. "You can't control me anymore." Zaid's eyes darkened, and he took another step closer. His voice softened, desperate. "I'm asking you to trust me. Please, we can fix this, together." Her chest tightened at his words. She had trusted him once, but it had cost her too much. He had never been the man she thought he was, and the truth was clear now. This wasn't love. "I trusted you," she whispered, her voice breaking just a little. "But I can't keep living in your world. I'm not part of your game anymore, Zaid. I can't stay." He reached for her, his hand grazing her arm, but she jerked away, her eyes filled with anger and pain. "Don't touch me, not anymore." For a moment, there was silence between them. His eyes searched hers, a flicker of something deep inside him that looked like regret. But it was too late. Maya had made her decision, and there was no turning back. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said quietly, the words almost lost in the tension that hung in the air. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You already have," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not going to let you do it again." Zaid's face tightened, and she saw the battle inside him, the desire to keep her, to pull her back into his world. But he knew, just as she did, that it was over. She took a deep breath, her heart heavy but resolute. She turned away from him, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the garage as she walked toward the car. The driver didn't say a word as she slid into the passenger seat, her body trembling with a mix of fear and relief. The engine roared to life, and the car sped out of the driveway, the mansion disappearing in the rearview mirror. Maya glanced back only once, as if to confirm that she was finally leaving it all behind. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of freedom. She was free. But even as the car drove further away, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Zaid's world wasn't done with her yet. It had claimed her once, and it wouldn't let go so easily. But for now she was safe. She was out, and that was all that mattered. Maya's heart had begun to settle as she drove through the quiet streets, the weight of the past weeks lifting slowly. She had left everything behind, the mansion, Zaid, the lies. It felt like a fresh start, a second chance at life. The pounding in her chest had slowed to a steady rhythm as the night grew darker, the headlights of the car illuminating the road ahead. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to relax. She was free. But even in the comfort of that thought, a whisper of doubt crept into the corners of her mind. Had she really escaped, or was this just another illusion? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her train of thought. With a quick glance at the screen, she saw the name flash in bold letters, Zaid. Her stomach dropped, and for a split second she considered ignoring it. But something urged her to answer. She couldn't explain why. Maybe because deep down she still felt something for him. "No, Maya, not anymore." Her thumb hovered over the screen as she hesitated. "It's not real," but she swiped to answer anyway. "Maya," Zaid's voice came through the speaker, quiet, tentative. "I need you to listen." She almost hung up, but his next words stopped her. "Please, just hear me out." The calmness in his voice was unsettling. It was the tone of someone who had accepted defeat, but still had one last card to play. She stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "I know I've hurt you," he said, the words laced with an emotion she couldn't quite read. And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand something. Her pulse quickened. What could you possibly say that would make me understand? Her voice came out colder than she intended, but the anger that still simmered beneath the surface pushed it out. I'm not just calling to apologize, Zaid continued, his tone shifting from pleading to something darker. I need you to come back. Maya's breath hitched. What? You don't understand what's happening, he said, his voice edged with urgency now. You're in danger, Maya. You can't hide from this forever. A rush of confusion flooded her. What are you talking about? She shook her head, trying to make sense of the words. I don't need your help. I'm done with you. Done with all of this. Zaid paused as though he was gathering his thoughts, then spoke again, his voice softer. I never wanted this for you, but there are people who won't stop until they get what they want. You're too important, Maya. Her heart raced, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. What are you talking about? Who are you talking about? Zaid sighed, frustration lacing his breath. You know who, my family. They won't let you go. You were always meant to be part of their plan, Maya. They won't just let you walk away. A cold chill ran down her spine. The world she had tried to escape from was pulling her back in, clawing at her from the shadows. Her mind raced with possibilities, but none of them were good. You don't get to decide my life, Zaid, she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay strong. I'm done. I won't go back to that world. I can't. He didn't respond right away, and for a moment, Maya thought he had given up. But then he spoke again, the words heavy with an underlying threat. I'm not asking you, Maya. I'm telling you. His voice was hard now, unrecognizable. You'll come back, or they'll come for you, and I can't protect you from that. Maya felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. The familiar dread crept back into her veins, icy and suffocating. She had walked away, had started to believe she could escape, but it was clear now. She was trapped. She swallowed, trying to steady her breath. Who will come for me? Zaid's voice lowered, almost a whisper. People with power, Maya. People who can destroy everything you care about. You're not safe, not unless you come back. She felt her hands shake, the fear clawing at her insides. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want to see you get hurt, Zaid said, his voice almost pleading again. I never wanted to pull you into this. But I can't just let you go out there, not like this. You're too exposed. The phone line went silent for a moment. Maya's chest tightened as she processed his words. Zaid wasn't just asking her to return. He was threatening her, manipulating her with his knowledge of her fear. And she hated him for it. I'm not coming back, she finally said, her voice trembling with conviction. I don't care what you say. You've done enough. I won't let you control me. She hung up the phone before he could respond, the silence in the car ringing louder than ever before. The weight of his words pressed down on her, but she couldn't afford to let them win. The truth of what he said settled uncomfortably in her mind. She wasn't safe, but there was still a chance to fight, to run, to take back control of her life. She had to leave. Just as she turned onto a side street, a shadow crossed her rearview mirror. The headlights of a car loomed behind her, too close, too familiar. Her breath caught. They had found her. She pushed the gas pedal harder, the car surging forward as the figure in the rearview mirror followed closely. The chase had begun. Maya's grip tightened on the wheel as she pushed the car faster, heart pounding, every nerve screaming. She wasn't going to go down without a fight. Maya's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as she sped down the darkened road, her heart racing. The car behind her had been gaining on her for miles now, its headlights a constant reminder of how close danger was. The world outside seemed to blur as she pushed the pedal harder, praying the car would hold together just a little longer. They're coming for me. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps, and her thoughts raced faster than the car in front of her. She couldn't afford to let them catch her. She couldn't afford to go back, not now, not after everything she'd fought for. The night air felt thick in her lungs as she turned sharply onto a side street, hoping the narrow alleyways would give her the cover she needed. The headlights of the car behind her flickered in her rearview mirror, the sound of tires skidding against the wet asphalt, a reminder of just how close they were. She couldn't keep running forever. She had to make a decision. She had to face it no matter what came next. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. Maya's heart skipped a beat when she saw the name flashing across the screen. Zaid. For a moment she thought about ignoring it, but something deep inside urged her to pick up. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the hope that there was still something left to salvage, or the nagging feeling that she needed to hear his voice one last time. Her finger hovered over the screen before she swiped to answer. "What do you want, Zaid?" she said, her voice steady but cold. "Maya." Zaid's voice crackled through the speaker, strained and urgent. "I know what's happening. They found you, haven't they?" Her stomach twisted. "You knew they'd come for me, didn't you?" Her voice trembled with the realization of how deeply she had been ensnared. "You knew this was never going to end." "I never wanted this for you, Maya." Zaid's voice softened, though there was an underlying edge to it. "I didn't want you to be dragged back into all of this, but you're a part of it now, whether you like it or not." Maya's grip tightened on the wheel, a tear slipping down her cheek despite the strength she was trying to muster. "No, I'm done with all of you. I don't want to be a part of your world anymore. I won't go back." Zaid's voice lowered, and she could almost hear the desperation in his words. "You're not listening, Maya. They'll come after you, and you won't survive alone. You have to come back to me, please." The pain in his voice should have softened her, but it didn't. She was done being the person he used, the person he controlled. She couldn't let him manipulate her any longer. "No, Zaid," she said firmly, cutting him off. "I don't need you to protect me. I don't need anything from you anymore. I can handle this on my own." There was a long pause before Zaid responded, the silence thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. "Maya, this isn't just about us anymore. It's bigger than both of us. If you walk away, they'll make sure you never have a life again. You'll be hunted, and I can't let that happen to you." Maya's breath hitched. She didn't want to believe him. She didn't want to think that everything she had worked so hard for, everything she had fought for, would crumble because of the decisions she made. But she had to face the truth. She was already deep in this world. "I won't go back," she said, her voice quieter now, the conviction in her words trembling. "I won't let them control me. Not anymore." Another long silence passed between them, but Zaid's next words sent a chill through her. "Then you leave me no choice," he said, his voice hardening. "If you won't come back, then I'll have to make you understand the consequences of your actions. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, Maya, even if it means doing something I never thought I'd have to do." Her heart stopped for a moment. "What are you saying?" she whispered, the fear creeping into her voice. "You have two choices, Maya," Zaid continued, the coldness in his tone like a blade. "Redemption or revenge. If you choose redemption, I can protect you. But if you continue to fight this, if you push me away, then I will have no choice but to make you pay for your rebellion. You'll be hunted, and I won't be able to stop them. Not if you don't come back to me." Maya's mind raced as his words sunk in. Was this a threat? Was this the price of freedom? "No," she said, her voice breaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "I'm done. I won't let you control me anymore. I won't be your pawn." Zaid's voice grew more strained. "You think you can just walk away from everything and be free, Maya? You think you can choose your own path and not face the consequences? It doesn't work that way. Not in our world." "I'm not part of your world anymore," Maya said, her voice firm, "and I'll never be again." Zaid didn't reply. The line went silent, and Maya knew without a doubt that he had made his choice. She wasn't sure whether it was redemption he wanted or revenge, but either way, it was a game she no longer wanted to play. The car behind her grew closer, and her grip tightened again, the adrenaline surging through her veins. This was it. The final push. She had no more choices left. Only one thing was certain. She had to keep moving, keep running, and not let the past pull her back. The city stretched out before her as Maya stood on the rooftop, the wind brushing through her hair, the cool night air filling her lungs with each deep breath. She had come a long way since that fateful night, the night she walked away from Zaid, from everything. Now, standing here, she felt a strange sense of peace, like she was finally beginning to understand who she truly was. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this journey had been easy. She had faced betrayal, manipulation, fear, and the harsh reality that the life she had once known was nothing but a facade. But now, as the sounds of the city buzzed below her, it was the first time in months that she felt like she was truly free. A slight sound from behind her made her turn. Jake was standing in the doorway, watching her with a quiet intensity, his face serious. He hadn't said much since they'd made their way to safety, but the weight of their shared silence spoke volumes. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the unspoken question of whether she was truly at peace with her decision. Maya nodded, though the weight of her past still lingered. "I will be," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm not sure I'll ever be able to fully move on from it all, but I'm trying." Jake stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You made the right choice, Maya. You know that, right? You don't have to go back to that life. You're not tied to them anymore." She met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself smile, even if it was small. "I'm trying to believe that," she said, "but it's hard to let go, you know? After everything that's happened, I don't know if I'll ever fully shake it off. It's like it's in my bones." He nodded, his expression understanding. "You will. It just takes time. You've already come so far, Maya. You've taken the first step, and you're stronger than you think." She let out a breath, the weight of his words settling in. Maybe she was stronger than she had given herself credit for. The past had tried to break her, to keep her tied to a world that was never meant for her. But she had walked away. She had chosen herself. "I know I can't undo everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I can keep moving forward. I don't need revenge. I don't need anything from them anymore. Just a chance to live on my own terms." Jake gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Then that's all that matters. You've got your life back, Maya. A new beginning." Her gaze drifted back to the horizon, to the lights of the city below. The world was still moving, still full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could finally breathe. Maya knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The past wasn't something you could just erase. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the flickers of memories that would never truly fade. But she was no longer afraid of what came next. She had walked away from Zaid, from a world that had tried to consume her. She had chosen her own path, a path that was her own, where she would no longer be controlled by anyone's expectations, anyone's lies. "I don't know what's next," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But I'm ready to find out." Jake nodded, and for the first time there was no weight in his eyes, just understanding. "You'll figure it out. You always have." Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had left behind settle in her chest. It wasn't just the life she had walked away from. It was the person she had been, the person she had been forced to become to survive. But that person was gone. She had shed that skin, and in its place was someone new, someone who wouldn't be defined by her past. "I'm ready," she repeated more to herself than anyone else. The world before her was full of unknowns, but it didn't scare her anymore. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty felt like freedom, not fear. Jake stood beside her, a silent partner in this new chapter of her life. Together, they didn't have all the answers, but they didn't need them. What mattered now was that Maya was no longer a prisoner to her past. She was free, and that was all that mattered. As she looked out over the city once more, the future seemed open to her, full of possibilities, full of hope. And for the first time in a long time, Maya believed that maybe, just maybe, the future could be brighter than the past ever was. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to choose. And that was enough.